All right, well, we are going to get started. We're like a minute early, but we got a lot to talk about, so I want to get started. Any prayer requests before we get started? If you weren't here for dinner, I mentioned that Nathan, our new staff person to Young Families, and his wife just had a baby about almost a month ago now, but he was born premature, and he has been in the hospital and had increasing troubles. He's been having some seizures and some heart palpitations. So they've sent him to New Orleans today. And of course, Nathan and Anna Grace are pretty torn up about that. So please pray for them. That's a real stressful thing. It's their first baby. I think he's not quite a month now. Oh, yeah, it was like right a day over that like cut line where, so it wasn't terribly premature for today's standards. Yeah, he's weighed like 7 pounds, so he was a good size. Yeah, he was a good size, maybe 6, but something that it wasn't a size issue. So. All right, anything else we could pray for? Welcome, guys, come on in. All right, well, let's have a word of prayer. Father, thank you for this evening, and God, I pray your blessings on our study as we open up this story. God, teach us and inspire us to be able to see tonight. And I do pray for anyone this evening who may come with a request, a burdened heart. God, we are burdened for our new young staff member, Nathan, and his wife, Anna Grace, and for Shepherd, their baby, and just pray for healing for him and for grace with the doctors to be able to discover what it is that is happening and be able to help resolve it. So bless us now this evening in Jesus' name, amen. All right. Well, we are studying a short story, Flannery O'Connor's A Good Man is Hard to Find. So real quick review. I think we have one new person, but she's an overachiever, and she read the story twice this week, so she's ready to go. So just a quick review. Last week we talked about one of the key concepts. By the way, hi, Foundry. Glad you're tuning in. Anyone else who's tuning in online. Last week we talked about one of the key foundational themes, and that is this exploration of goodness. What is goodness? And this is the core concept of Christianity, sin. And so the very title, A Good Man is Hard to Find, is really an allusion to Scripture in many places that teach this Christian truth that we're all sinners and we're all in need of a Savior. And so truly as we look at this story, there are no good characters. Now, they're obviously all a caricature of really bad characters, and that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to try to break open a character study. It's super hard. You might not think it, but these are rich characters with lots of stuff to say, each of them. You might think, well, what do we really know about, this little boy, John Wesley? He may, what does he say, a half a dozen things or something? Well, I think you'll be surprised. So we're going to look tonight at the children, John Wesley, June Star, and we're going to look at the mother, and we're going to look at the father, Bailey Boy. Now, next week is where we're going to really dive into this ending, and understand that one of Flannery O'Connor's, she had really two purposes: to communicate the gospel to secular people. And to do that really required some shock, value, but also to really challenge and wake up Christian people out of complacency. So I don't want to dive too much into next week, but I'll just say this. The violence of the Bible is something we can become a little, accustomed to. But like if you watch The Passion of the Christ, it's a hard thing to watch. To watch the utter violence of Jesus's last hours is shocking. And so we can forget about just how shocking this story of redemption is and all of the contradictions involved in that. And that is a part of the story of the ending of the good man is hard to find. But we'll hang on to that for next week. So let's get started with John Wesley. So what I've done on your sheet is actually the same process that you would use if you were doing a character study on someone from the Bible. So let's say you wanted to do a character study on Andrew. And so you say, well, what do we know about Andrew? He's, they mention him a few times in, the New Testament. And, what, you're going to do a whole sermon, Pastor, on Andrew? Oh, you better believe it. You'll be real surprised just pulling out the 3 or 4 times that Andrew appears, what he says, how people respond to him, and what it says about a character like Andrew. And that's what I've done here on this sheet. I've pulled out for each of these characters everything that they said or everything that was said about them. And we're going to try to develop a characterization of them. This is what brilliant authors do. Now in the Bible, these are real people. And so they're what we call round characters. They've got depth. They're complex. They're not simple or shallow. In literature, that's extraordinarily difficult to do, especially in a short story where you don't have much space, and to do that with characters like this that only say a little bit. But these are, we call them round characters, and they're very three-dimensional and complex. Okay, so what do we know about John Wesley, the little boy, the 8-year-old boy? Say it again. He wears glasses and okay, wears glasses and kind of chunky. You good? What else? Yeah, he's a snot-nosed little brat, isn't he? Okay, so now maybe on one hand we might say, that's about it, right? Wears glasses. He's a little chunky boy, and he's a real snotty kid. He's rude and obnoxious. Well, I think that's his sister, who's disappointed no one dies. He is excited though. It says they're both excited about the accident, that's kind of funky, right? So let's just look at his rudeness and disrespectfulness. That's certainly one characteristic. So right at the beginning, he says to his grandmother, well, if you don't want to go to Florida, why don't you just stay home? Okay, so that's pretty rude to say to your grandmother, right? But all of this is pretty clear and obvious, right? He's disrespectful, he's obnoxious, but there's a lot more that is not so obvious. Now that's enough. It's enough for us to say, yeah, I don't like this little dude because he's a spoiled brat. But it actually is much deeper. So let's look at a couple of things that he says early on. He says, let's go through Georgia fast so we won't have to look at it much. And then he says, Tennessee is just a hillbilly dumping ground, and Georgia is a lousy state too. Now, what does this tell us? He's got stereotypes. He's 8 years old. Okay, there we go. So he's never even been to Tennessee. They made a point of saying that. That's what the grandma said. Well, let's go to Tennessee. They've never been to East Tennessee. So he has judgments about Tennessee, though he's never been there. And he's talking about a state. He's an 8-year-old. He doesn't know any of this. He's clearly parroting what he has heard from the adults in his life. Now, why is that important? Well, remember a part of what this is what Flannery O'Connor is doing. She is making a critique of Southern life and culture in the 1950s. And what was Southern life and culture known for? Well, we had a sign up at Washita for a while. It was faith, family, and football. It's like, well, there we go. There's the South for you, right? Faith, family, and football. But what is it that Southern folks take pride in? They take pride in their culture, right? They take pride in the centrality of faith, belief. They take pride in the centrality of family and of values. And there has long been, and remember, we're especially talking about mid-20th century, this differentiation between the South and the Yankees up there. And so here, what we see O'Connor doing very subtly is showing us that this family, that while they act the part of Southern culture, there actually is a bit of disdain for the own Southern culture that they're a part of. And that begins to show this hypocrisy that we see, this contradiction. So the grandmother constantly talks about the good old days, and she represents Southern hospitality and talks about how the children should respect their native states. But clearly John Wesley has heard other stuff from mom and from dad that is a bit disparaging about their own home state. So they claim to value Southern heritage and yet express contempt for it at the same time. So this is the hypocrisy, and this is a huge part of the message of this story, hypocrisy. And it already starts to show itself here in John Wesley. Now, the contrast in John Wesley's behavior shows some real dysfunction and something disturbing. So on one hand, we see him having this little cloud game, with his sister. What's that cloud shaped like? And we see a couple little things. We see him lying about one of the shapes because he doesn't want his sister to win. And then we see them kind of slapping each other over the top of the grandmother, right? Now, is there anything especially egregious about that? Or is that just what little kids are going to do in a car ride? I mean, that's what an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old little girl are going to do in the car, right? So there's nothing particularly upsetting about that. That's just little kids being little kids. But there is some serious lines that get crossed with John Wesley. And we see it, I think, most succinctly when he's unhappy because dad won't turn off to go try to find this house. What does he do? Kicks the back of his seat so hard that the dad feels it in his kidneys. So that's not an annoyance of like, that's the serious violence to his dad. And, we'll get into dad in a bit, but what does dad do? I'll tell you what my dad would have done. He'd have pulled that car over, and I'd have been out in the back of that car, right? But the dad, doesn't. He does stop, but he actually gives in, which reinforces that, hey, what I just did worked. And that's the ticket to get what I want. And so clearly this is not new. This is an established pattern because we see it now repetitively in this little car ride. And so what is it we see? Well, we see this Southern family that is filled with dysfunction. And so this picture of faith and family and values, that is what the South is kind of embedded in their ethos and their culture, actually shows itself to be quite different when you get below the surface. Below the surface, there's much more dysfunction and ugliness there. And so we see that in this little 8-year-old boy and even, in his father's response to him. But we also see in John Wesley a deep flaw in Southern culture. And you might not have picked up on it, but it actually shows itself in two ways, and that is racism. Now, what happens with John Wesley? Well, his grandmother's telling a story about watermelon, and I think we referred to this last week, right? So you remember that story about the watermelon? So, his grandmother says, that he used to date this guy, and, he would leave a watermelon with his initials on it, and his initials were E-A-T. And this little black boy came by and thought that meant, eat it, and so, he took the watermelon. Well, John Wesley, it says, giggled and giggled and giggled at that story. Now, on one hand, you could say, well, he's a little boy and he thought it was funny. It is a little funny, right? But in that, what we see is a little boy who, we see two things there. We see, number one, it's a racist story. And we see how racism is transmitted. It's transmitted from father and mother to child, to father and mother to child. This is how it's passed on. It's passed on generationally. And the ugliness of it is that it's so natural and normal for little John Wesley to laugh at this story. He doesn't think about it. Now, you could argue that he doesn't have the intellectual capacity to really understand that yet. But that actually is how things like that get taught. Because the grandmother, she's clearly a racist. She's the one telling the story. And she has the worst kind of racism. And that is a racism that she doesn't even recognize in herself. You can almost bet that if you got into a discussion with the grandmother, she would absolutely say that she was not a racist. She would argue till she was blue in the face. And she would say something like, some of my best friends are black people. And she would not even recognize in herself the ugliness of the racism. And that little story is just one evidence of it. And there's another. Does anyone remember what the other one is?
The example of racism?
Yeah, in the grandmother.
The little boy that they see when they're driving towards the beginning of the story.
Yeah, she calls him a pickaninny, and that's a derogatory term for a little black child. And what she says is, "Oh, I wish I could paint a picture of that scene." And why is that significant?
She amused by it. The image of him on the front porch or something, and he wasn't wearing article clothing.
Yeah, I think there was some amusement, some pity. But why would she want a picture of that? Because that snapshot on the wall says, this is the way it should be. This is what we like to see. Little black boys, poor, without any clothes, looking like animals. This is the way life should be. So it's the combination of, she does actually use the N-word, calls him a pickaninny, and it's this condescension towards the scene. There's no real compassion. It is more amusement and maybe some pity, but she also she wishes she had a snapshot of that so that she could put it on her wall. Exactly, that's it, the good old days. The good old days, yes. Same concept, same concept. These black folks are starting to rise up, and, we like the way they were in the good old days and wish we could have a picture of that. And of course, the irony is this is the 1950s, which is just at the scratch in the surface of what's about to be an explosion of civil rights in America. And again, a part of the sadness of it is in the 1950s in the South, the churches were behind the 8 ball when it came to standing up against racism. And rather than leading the charge and being the voice of morality there, they were sometimes leading the charge for things to stay the same, and at least not intervening in things.
To add to what you're just saying in context, O'Connor wrote this about 1955 or so. In Monroe in 1955, we still had colored and white restrooms and drinking fountains downtown. In Woolworths and Morgan and Lindsay, and then all the gas stations. And that's the context in which she was writing.
Yeah.
At that time, we think today that was a long time ago, but I remember all that.
Yeah, exactly.
And Jim Crow was still alive.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you just don't know any difference. Mm-hmm. And, mm-hmm. Which is exactly what we see here in John Wesley. He's just innocently laughing at this story, doesn't think about it. Doesn't understand the concept of racism, likely, at 8 years old, but it's already there. Because this is simply natural to him. Mm. Yeah, so she refused to sit in the front seat because she understood. She understood what would happen potentially if someone saw her.
Point is that not everybody was racist.
Absolutely. Um, absolutely. I had a grandfather like that. Yeah. There were certainly people who were exceptions, but you can't really argue that the rule, the majority, either supported or went along with it and didn't stand up to fight it. So anyway, that's just a subtle, little interesting part of the story with John Wesley. It does sit on or expose this ugly flaw in Southern culture. So let's talk about his name. So it should be an easy one, right here. John Wesley. Now the question is that an accident? Of course not. There's nothing in this story that's an accident. Okay, but so what does it mean then? That his name is John Wesley? Why did Flannery O'Connor write this little boy's name as John Wesley?
I think it's an example of them going through the motions of what they thought was a Christian culture, but not really living it.
Who?
The family's parents.
Okay, so his parents named him that, right? So what does it say? Well, it says that his parents knew who John Wesley was, and they had aspirations for him. So their aspirations, I mean, John Wesley, I mean, he's a not just Christian man, he's an influential leader, a leader of men, a leader of a movement. And so to name your son John Wesley says something about the parents' aspirations in wanting their son to grow up with those kinds of Christian values, to be a Christian man and a Christian leader. And so as we keep going, we say, uh-oh. What happened? Right? Doesn't that lead us to say, uh-oh, what happened? It is not working out too well, is it? So the formation didn't happen. And that takes us back to this parenting. Clearly, their aspirations for him were not developing, and he's not been parented. And we see that in the example of him kicking the back of the seat and just his overall behavior. And again, the biggest part of parenting is about example. And so clearly the example that he's seen has not reflected this original desire, for him to have Christian values. Now again, what is it that Flannery O'Connor is saying? This gets back to that hypocrisy. The intention not measuring up to the reality of how you're living your life. So she's recognizing and pointing out this hypocrisy in Southern culture. He's clearly learned at home. He's been uncorrected, and the parents wanted the appearance in the son named after a Christian saint, but they failed at the reality. So this is what O'Connor is talking about: performance without substance, which is really what we see in each of these characters. Performance without substance. All right, any other thoughts about John Wesley? Let's talk about June Star then. All right, so June Star. Since we're talking names, let's talk June Star. Any thoughts about that? Okay. The tap dance. Okay, good. Okay, so it's interesting this, in we Southern culture likes these names, like Anna Grace and June Star, and so this kind of flowery, pretty name like that, but June Star. What kind of aspirations?
To be important, to be something others can see and star.
Oh, okay, that kind of star. Okay. June? What is June? It's a month. Yes, wedding month. Let's just stick with month. Month, star, month, stars. So, you guys see, I think you guys clearly are not very into your astrological signs. Okay. Which is that's not surprising here, right? Yeah, so June stars, this kind of vague reference to astrology and the stars. This has very much been a part of pagan worship, pagan non-Christian practice over all of time. And it's very much anti-Christian. And then when we really dig down deep in the Bible, it doesn't take too much to make an association here to Lucifer, who is also named the morning star. And literally, Lucifer means light bearer or morning star. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12, how you have fallen from heaven, morning star, or Lucifer, son of the dawn. Now, if you look at, you said it, if you look at June Star, she's pretty prideful, isn't she? She's pretty full of herself for a little girl. This is why Satan fell, because of pride. He was called the most beautiful of all of the angels. And of course, now we see some real conflict, right? We have one little boy who is named after a famous Christian leader, and a little girl who has opposite connotations to her name. Now, again, this is more about hypocrisy, right? About both. What is hypocrisy? Those two things living together. That's hypocrisy. Where you have Christian values and desires, but non-Christian inclinations that exist in the same place. Sometimes at different times, one of them is, what you show is not always what you are. This is hypocrisy. Well, June Star is an interesting character. We talked about her a bit last week. You remember what we said about her? Okay, she's certainly snotty, disrespectful, rude, right? Wouldn't want to live there either. So if you remember what we said, makes fun of the restaurant. But the key thing we talked about is she said, I wouldn't live here for $1 million. This broken down place. It's the truth. It was rude, but it was true. Now, here's a fascinating thing we see about June Star. She is rude, but you know what she does? She tells the truth. So here's what she says about her grandmother early on. She says she wouldn't stay at home to be queen for a day. She wouldn't stay at home for $1 million, afraid she'd miss something. She has to go everywhere we go. Now, is it polite? No. Is it true? Yes. And this concept of queen for the day, the grandmother she kind of is the queen of the family. She kind of holds court over the family.
But also, I'm not sure when in time that television show, Queen for a Day, came up, are you familiar with that?
Before my time, apparently. What was it? 1950s. Oh, what was it about?
Women were competing to be crowned queen for a day.
Ah. Okay, so it was a reference to that television show. I would imagine so. Ah.
Something that grandmother would have watched.
Okay.
There would be 4 contestants. I went actually, my family went to the show.
Wow.
And every woman filled out a card of what she would love to win if she were queen for a day. And so then the contestants are all there and it's sort of a judging of who deserves it the most, who deserves the second one.
Okay. Ah, very good, very good. Now, here's one of the key things. So John mentioned it. When they crashed, both of the kids squealed in delight, which is, dysfunctional, odd, right? But June Star, it says specifically, if you look at it, it says, she says that as the grandmother was limping out of the car, she said, "Oh, but no one was killed." Clearly referencing the grandmother, because she was looking at her as she limped out of the car. Now, is that ugly? Yeah, it's terrible, right? It's terrible. I'd say this what her true thoughts were, yes. Good thought. So here's part of the interesting thing with June Star. She is associated with Satan, but she is a prophet. Now, what is a prophet? Prophet in the Bible is someone who speaks truth. They speak right judgment. And the truth is, as ugly as it is a thing to say, she didn't die. There is some truthful judgment in that. Why? Well, I mean, if you just look at it from a purely simple perspective, grandmother caused this crash. The grandmother snuck the cat into the car, which jumped on Bailey Boy, that caused the wreck. The grandmother lied about this mansion that they were supposed to go to. It was in a totally different state than what they were in, and so she was very directly responsible for this crash and ultimately the death of this entire family. And so when you look at it from that perspective, it actually is the right judgment, which doesn't even go into the larger judgment against the grandmother as really the worst character in this story, perhaps even more so than the misfit. Which we'll get more into that next week. But you see the point? The point is that even in this awful statement, and we just look at it as a statement, we say, oh my gosh, that is horrible. And it is, and yet it also has in it embedded truth. And then when we get to the end of the story, so the misfit says to Bobby Lee, or he says actually to June Star, hey, would you take, hold hands with Bobby Lee and let him take you out in the woods? And what does she say? I don't want to hold hands with him. He reminds me of a pig. And the truth is, he is a pig. Number one, he's described as a fat slob. He wears a red sweatshirt with a silver medallion, or silver stallion embossed on the front. He takes this family out and kills them in cold blood, and comes back with a yodel saying, "Woohoo, some fun." And so he is the definition of a pig. So again, with June Star, what at first glance appears to be rude and ugly is actually a true statement. It's truth. It's judgment against this god-awful excuse for a human being who kills women and children in cold blood. So here's the irony here. You see in June Star someone who is really a false prophet in the sense that her name is associated with astrology, a pagan name, a false light, and yet she speaks more truth than anyone else in the story.
When you say she speaks truth, are you saying she's speaking truth in her mind, or she's speaking the truth of what a normal individual would say? I mean, help me understand.
Well, she's speaking truth. So when she says, no, he reminds me of a pig, no, he was a pig. So when she says, oh, no one died, this is judgment. This is right judgment against the grandmother who has caused this whole tragedy to happen by her actions, her lying, her manipulation, her deceit, and there's judgment against her for that. So no, she is actually speaking truth in contrast to the grandmother, for example, who really claims to be this good Christian woman who is constantly lying and is deceiving, and who you really can't believe anything that comes out of her mouth. There's she may be polite, but in her politeness is only a cover for deceit and lies and racism and manipulation. She's trying to manipulate her environment throughout the story.
I said I looked her up. She was a sociology minor,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a Swedish psychologist who tested children to try to find out when they could understand right and wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and basically 7 was 8, just so that matches Christianity's component. So I figure that Mr. Wesley here was slow to develop that component,
Mm.
but she was right on target.
Mm.
She was able to understand everything that was going on and possibly what was about to happen.
Yeah, interesting. So again, what is O'Connor trying to say? Well, again, just a part of what she's saying is this coming back to a couple of things: the nicety, the niceness of the South that can be a covering for ugliness underneath. So being nice in the exterior when you're ugly inside is not genuine, and it's not real, it's not helpful. June Star is rude, so she's eviscerating Southern niceness culture. June Star is rude, but she sees. The adults in the story are polite, but they're blind. And that's part of what O'Connor is trying to communicate. Good. Well, let's move on to the mother. So, how does it describe the mother? Say it again. Okay. Invisible, passive, great words. What's her physical description? So it's quite an odd description, isn't it? She's described as a vegetable and a rabbit. So, I think that rabbit is pretty important. Now, what's happening with the mother? Well, again, Flannery O'Connor, she doesn't play. And what is she doing? She's critiquing the place of women in 1950s Southern culture. And what is her place? Well, first of all, she doesn't even have a name. She's the children's mother. So she has no personhood. She is described as looking like a cabbage, which can imply a couple of things. Number one, she doesn't have a brain. Number two, she's a commodity. And that might sound mean, but this is actually, through history, what women often have been viewed as, a commodity owned by the male. And she is described with these rabbit ears. So what are rabbits known for? Copulation. They were going at it like rabbits. So copulation and fertility, and they popping out babies. Why do they have so many babies? Because they're at the bottom of the food chain. Everybody loves rabbits. So coyotes love rabbits, and everything out there loves rabbits. And so got to have a lot of babies if you're going to have some that grow up to be big people. They're prey. They're at the bottom of the food chain. Now, all of this starts to have an ugly picture, right? And then, the other, so what are women? Well, clearly their role is to have children and be homemakers. And every time we see the mother, she's got the baby in her arm. Even when her shoulder's broken, she's got the babies in her arm. It starts out, the first thing we see, she's feeding the baby. This baby is attached to her. So this is her only purpose in life, is to have children. And interestingly, there's no reference even to her as a wife. In fact, she has no name, and interestingly, Bailey doesn't even defend his wife. Because, what's a self-respecting man going to do? Say, he's going to have a sit-down with mom. Hey, mom, look, I love you. We want you to be in our house. Okay, but you can't call my wife the children's mother. Okay, that's disrespectful. You're going to have to call her by her name. That's what a man's going to do, right? But Bailey doesn't do that, nor does she stand up for herself. So it's a tragic picture, this picture of this woman. She's reduced to a biological function, and she's doomed to victimhood. It's interesting in the story how much she suffers. She breaks her shoulder, she has blood streaming down her face, and no one notices. No one pays attention to her. No one defends her. She is a victim in the story. Now, you might then want to say, well, Christ suffered at the hands of people, but hers was not a Christ-like suffering. Christ's suffering was voluntary for others that grew out of his strength. Her suffering is because she refuses to stand up for herself, has accommodated herself to everyone around her, and her suffering is a result of her weakness, not of her strength. And we talked last week about the most damning thing about her, and that is that she does not fight for her children. In fact, it's a sad line, maybe one of the saddest lines in the story, when the misfit says to her, would you like to join Bailey in the woods? How does she respond? Yes. Yes, please. And so this absolute passivity in the face of the impending death of her children, she's a party to it. She walks them to their death passively rather than fighting for them. Now, certainly you could argue that she couldn't do anything, but I don't think that would matter to any self-respecting mother. You're going to fight. You're going to scream. You're going to hit. You're going to run. You're not going to say, hey, would you like to go out there and let Bobby Lee kill you? Please, thank you. So it's a sad picture, but I think it's also important to note that Flannery O'Connor is not blaming the mother. Who is Flannery O'Connor blaming? I wouldn't say the grandmother. Who is Flannery O'Connor blaming for the mother's failures? She's a failure at the only thing that she is her identity, mother. Is she beating up the mother? No, she's blaming society. She's blaming Southern culture that has forced her into this position where her only option is to be a mother. That her biology is all that her purpose amounts to. Now, is this what the Bible says? Absolutely not. The Bible says that that we're all creatures created in the image of God. One of the most beautiful chapters in the Bible is Proverbs chapter 31 on the characteristics of a woman and a mother. There's intrinsic value in the personhood of every person, and certainly the beauty of a woman is very much a part of the ethos of Scripture. And so none of this can be blamed on Bible or theology. This is a breakdown of culture that would allow women to lose their identity and personhood. And so that's the tragedy that Flannery O'Connor is discussing. And trust me when I say, Flannery O'Connor was not this kind of woman. Not at all. Okay, so last, and gosh, we don't have much time, but I want to talk about Bailey. What's his name? So we see significance in all these names, right? What's the name? Okay, Bailey Boy. Yeah, Bailey Boy. He's Mama's boy, right? And so how do we see Bailey at the very beginning of the story? What's he doing? Reading the sports page. Now, look, I read the sports page. I would look at ESPN every day, but for Bailey, this is a reflection of the fact that he ain't no grown man. He's still just reading the sports page. There's nothing serious about Bailey Boy. He doesn't defend his wife who's called the children's mother. He only glares at his mother when she asks him to dance, that's an odd thing, isn't it? His mama asked him if he wanted to dance at the restaurant. Like, and what does he do? He just glares. So he has no voice against his mother. There's something a little dysfunctional about that relationship. For her to call him Bailey boy and him have an inability to stand up to his mother. And so there's something there, I think, about a bit of dysfunction, unhealthy enmeshment, oppressive closeness that masquerades as Southern family values. So let's see what he talked about, is allowing the son to kick him. It's interesting, isn't it? This little part. He did finally blow up at his mother, didn't he? How does it describe that? The misfit showed up, and grandmother says, "I know you." And he says something, this is how it says it. He says something that shocked even the children, which is a really interesting thing to say, right? Shocked even the children. So what beautiful writing, that just leaves it to our imagination of what he said, to his mother. Shut the up, you. And the kids were like, but just the concept that it shocked even the children says something about what they have heard and become accustomed to in their own home, in their own family. But what is this? Well, this is the bottled up rage of the man-child here. So this is a man who, again, what's the Southern concept of masculinity? Well, you're the head of the household, you're strong, you provide for your family, and you protect them at all costs. So, strong, virile man. And what we see in Bailey Boy is exactly the opposite of that. And he's afraid of his mother. He's afraid to parent his kids. It appears that he's afraid to see his wife as an equal because it apparently would threaten his true masculinity. Notice he says, "Listen, we're in a terrible predicament. Nobody realizes what this is." And then it says, in parentheses, his voice cracked. So it's not that he doesn't recognize the problem that they're in after this crash, but he's frozen in fear. And the tragic picture that it describes, how does it describe him kind of towards the end, before he dies? Anyone remember? How does it describe him? What's his position? How's his body position? He's crouched. He's crouched like a runner, ready to sprint. He's ready to jump. But he doesn't move. Can't move. He's frozen. And so this is Bailey Boy. He's a caricature of masculinity, who's driven by fear. And so it's really a pretty devastating insight and statement. What O'Connor is saying is that strength that comes only from a culturally defined role is not a strength at all. In other words, strength grows out of character, not because of a role that you're supposed to have. So she's very critical of these roles that men and women are kind of placed in. And it's not that she's saying that there's anything wrong with a woman being a homemaker and a mother. She's saying that it's wrong that there's no real humanity, that women lose their personhood because this is their only option. And she's not saying that there's anything wrong with the man being strong and the provider and the protector. She is saying that that role without the underlying character is a problem. In the same way that a woman with a role without the underlying character that accompanies it is a tragedy. And what she saw was too much of people playing roles without having the underlying character that goes along with it. Now, what's really fascinating about this particular picture is that she's recognizing what we talk about today as toxic masculinity, which is a authority without responsibility, masculinity defined by role rather than character. 75 years before it ever became a part of our vocabulary. Now, we could argue that it's swung the other direction, now, but that's a discussion for another day. So, there we go. These are 4 characters that there's some rich depth to, that each are making powerful statements about that we can certainly see and apply to our own Christian lives, in understanding of the importance of being genuine and real and having true character and not just acting the parts that we're supposed to play. All right, I know that was a lot. I told you it was going to be a lot. But next week is going to be tough to get in an hour. But we'll do our best. So next week is obviously the culminating, big ending of the story. And there's a lot there. And I'll tell you what it is. It's that grace is costly. Grace is costly. Redemption requires the shedding of blood. So we'll try to unwrap all of that next week. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And I think it's possible for two people to think that there's two truths. I mean, you look at these girls